Today is the day that I have finally got the time to be able to do a multi-part series on airbrushing. What is it? Why do you want to do it? And how can it help you to achieve professional grade finishes on your Gundam kits, your planes, your spaceships, your cars, whatever it is that you're painting? Learning how to airbrush is going to take your finishes to a whole nother level. For those of you that are just coming in, this is catered for you. So the first thing we're going to go over is the airbrushes themselves and what's different from them between using something that many of you may already be using now, which is a regular brush. Well, here's the thing. A brush obviously is going to make contact with any surface that you're trying to paint because that's what you use to apply the paint. An airbrush, on the other hand, does not have such an issue. Some of the reasons why you want to learn how to airbrush versus using a regular brush is the fact that since there's nothing contacting the surface physically other than the paint itself when you're airbrushing, it's going to give you a lot more blended, a lot more even look than if you were using a brush. The other thing on top of that is you'll have no texture to the surface that a brush would normally leave behind through the bristles and the paint. Now, here's the thing. Is it difficult to airbrush? No, it's actually not. It's just a matter of changing how you hold the actual paint medium, because when you're using a brush, you normally use it like a pencil or a pen. When you're using an airbrush, you kind of don't have that flexibility as much. You can, but it is different. A lot of it is going to be in the wrist, a lot of it is going to be in your ability to control the airflow, etc., etc. So, airbrushes themselves, which should you buy? Why should you buy them? What differentiates them? Well, today I'm going to discuss two different ones, and that is what is called a siphon feed and a top feed. These are basically the ones that I use. Now, they are exactly as they sound. A top feed is what we see right here with this Iwata Neo. Now, by the way, everything I'm showing you today is from Iwata. I am not sponsored by them whatsoever. This is just what I use. I've used multiple types of airbrushes in the past. They all work great. I don't have complaints over them. However, I'm getting that out there now. This is an unbiased view in regards to airbrushing, not paid for in any which way by sponsorship. So what I have right here are two Iwata Neo airbrushes. One is a top feed. As you can see here, it has a cup on the top that the paint is poured inside of. And then you also have a siphon feed, which means the paint can go in a little cup like this, or it can go in different variable size jars like this that will attach to the bottom, and that's how the paint comes out of the gun. It sucks it up like a siphon. The benefits to using either of these, there's plenty of benefits for each one. For me personally, what I use more is the siphon feed because it's just easier for me to clean and a bit more efficient for me. However, the top feed is not hard to clean either. The top feed comprises of the cup along with a little lid. Now this lid has a tiny hole in it to keep from pressure building up in here and this exploding out when you try to paint. The other thing about the top feed is the fact that you can change cups depending on the airbrush model itself. This one is not wanting to come out. I've pulled it out before, but it's just kind of locked in there pretty tight. I can switch cups here from Iwata to bigger ones, smaller ones. It all depends on exactly what it is that I'm painting and the amount of paint that I'm going to need for that kit. So that is the difference between a top feed and a siphon feed. Another thing that you want to keep in mind when airbrushing or taking it up is water. That's right. A compressor will produce water inside of it as you are painting. Condensation builds up inside the compressor itself, and if you don't have what's called a water trap right here, or as you see on this Iwata Smart Jet, there's a water trap right there. What these do is collect all the water that's inside here. It stops it before it comes out of your gun, because nobody wants to get water all over their paint job while the paint is wet. Needless to say, that's going to ruin it, and you're going to have to go and do everything all over again. I know, because that used to happen to me all the time, and it is no fun. So now that we've got the airbrush differences out, just two of them out of the way, we've also discussed water traps, why they're important. They all connect to something called a compressor. Now, the compressor is what builds the air up and what gives you the airflow to be able to spray whatever paint you need to spray. There's many different types of compressors. However, the ones that I use today is the Iwata Ninja and the Smart Jet Pro. If noise is not an issue for you, There are plenty of other options out there. I live in a condo, so the less noise I make, the better. Sometimes when my neighbors are in town, other times it just doesn't really matter. But I do like these because I can paint in the middle of the night if I want to and not wake up my wife. That's a huge thing, is not upsetting your family when you're painting, especially in the middle of the night, whenever you may so feel inspired to paint. What I will do is a sound test of both of these for you. Now, the Iwata Ninja comes in cheaper than the Smart Jet Pro. And this is exactly that. This is pretty much a pro level line airbrush compressor. Now there are some that are even more so than this that have even more adjustability to them, but really all that I need in my compressors is to have a pressure gauge to know what it is, or to already know right out of the box how much pressure is being produced by the compressor at any given moment. The Smart Jet Pro will fill up with air, and as I'm spraying continuously, it will turn on for a second or two and continue to do so to keep up the amount of airflow. So let's say I set my compressors at 20 psi to 30 psi. In order for it to maintain a continuous 20 psi and not drop off and drop off and drop on, is to obviously turn on as I'm painting. Now the reason why you want a compressor that can give you continuous airflow is because let's say you wanted to do a straight line. You want a continuous flow, even pressure, because if you don't do that, you're gonna have a blob of paint, then it'll fade out with the pressure, then kick on back in, then fade out and kick on back in. And I don't think I need to explain to you how disastrous that would be as you're trying to do a paint job. You need good, even flow, consistent flow. So I'll show you the difference between the sound levels of both of these. Now keep in mind, I'm not in necessarily the most acoustically damp area. You might still hear a little bit of an echo. However, it should give you a good realistic real world point because let's face it, not everybody's room that they paint in is acoustically treated. So the noise level on these is actually not bad at all. I can't tell you the exact decibels it comes in, but I can say that I used to have an old Badger setup. That thing was loud. These are like a mouse fart in comparison. So the Iwata Ninja, I'm going to start off with that right now and show you what the noise level is of this. Now mind you, this is continuous that this will be on as I'm painting because as you can tell, there really isn't much of a tank inside this thing. It's just gonna continue to keep pumping air through it. So we're gonna turn the Ninja on right now. That's not that bad. You can still hear me through it. I have to raise my voice a little bit just to make sure you can hear me. But I can paint, keep my finger on this. It's just gonna continue to give me the right amount of pressure that I need. Now, I'll turn this off. As you may notice with this airbrush, there's no real external pressure gauges on this guy anywhere. It's not even an inline here itself, but I do know that this will put out 20 psi for me. And I can see my knob right here. In the instruction manual, it will tell you exactly how much PSI this can give out continuous. So I can adjust that with the flow with this knob right over here. Another thing, if you have an Iwata Ninja, take for instance, I just turned it on, had it going. If I go to turn it on again, it turned on that time. Sometimes it won't kick on the compressor, and that's because there's too much air built up, and you have to let the air out, turn it back on, and it will work. And then that will fall out too. These do vibrate, so keep that in mind too. If you have any kind of pieces that you're painting in an area that they could fall out, you kind of want to keep your pieces you're painting secure. So now we're going to move on to the Iwata Smart Jet Pro. Now this one has a pretty fair sized compressor inside of it, as you can see here. Doesn't take up a lot of real estate space. It's not a big compressor at all. Granted, it's a giant compared to the Ninja, but it's still not big in its own right. This is on right now, and I have it set to 30 psi. That's normally what I spray at. I have an adjustability knob here too, and the water trap, let's see if we can get some water out of this guy. If I could just press it up, where is it? Here. Yeah, there's water. See that water that came out? That, if I did not have a water trap, would be shooting out of this gun, spitting all over what I'm painting. So to hear what this sounds like, you just heard it right now, but take a listen. That's not really bad. And notice how it turns off. That's why it's called smart. It knows when to give me air pressure and it knows when to shut its mouth. Unlike this guy right here, who is completely not silent like a Ninja and just the whole time. So it's really based on your needs. See, if I hold this down, This guy you would think is off, but it's actually still on. So hopefully that gives you a better idea as to how these two work. So now that we have gone over the compressor, now an inline water trap, if I jump back real quick, you will see there's a tiny little peg on this guy right here. Maybe you can see it, maybe you can't. Get some pressure in here. This is what I press to be able to get water out of the trap. And that's it. You always want to make sure that this guy is not leaking, because they could leak, and then it's going to make this work harder, and you're going to lose air pressure as you're doing this. But there we go. It's empty. Now, the way these airbrushes work is through a little knob on the top here, or I should say a little button that you press here and you slide it back and forth. Now, I'm not going to get too much into the detail of that right now. In the next video, I'm going to do a breakdown of these and show you how they exactly work mechanically. But what I can show you right now is I have a little bit of water right here. Now, mind you, I never turned this guy off. He's been on the entire time, holding its pressure like a champ. So I can take this and pull back, and there comes the water. So this would be your paint, really. It's pressed down, releases air now. Now we got air flowing, and the more I pull back, it allows more paint to flow out till eventually it comes out full blast. Now, if you want to see how this works for the top feed, I would take the lid off, take some of my paint, whatever it is that I'm painting, pour it in the top here. So now what I'm going to do, since I showed you the air pressure on this system flowing at a constant 30, I'm going to show you what the pressure regulator does. So if I have no pressure, nothing's coming out. As I start to turn the knob, I can start to see little particulates, little bit coming out right now. But the higher I turn the knob up, the more paint is going to start coming out of my gun. And that happens by pulling back. Another added benefit to being able to use airbrushes is in some cases you actually lose less paint. And the reason for that is the fact that you're spraying all of the material out of the gun. Whereas with a brush, sometimes it's going to have more paint on the brush itself versus that you would have on the airbrush. Now, that's not always the case. It depends on your application and what you're doing, but you can be a little more efficient with the airbrush and the paint. So take, for instance, here, if I use this Tamiya, I can use this brush to paint it on, or I could use the airbrush. The differences are going to be fairly different in the finish, which leads me into the next video, part 2 in this series. Part 2, what I'm gonna do is cover a full teardown of these airbrushes. I'm gonna show you the inner workings, how they work. So this way, when you're actually painting, mentally, it should make a lot more sense for you to be able to produce something more consistent once you know how the actual airbrush itself is working. So now that we've covered compressors, we've covered water traps, we've covered pressure gauges, we will move on to the actual breakdown of the airbrushes themselves, and then from there, I'm going to show you a couple of brief techniques, basics. After that, we're gonna kind of jump into some more advanced stuff, which is cleaning these thoroughly, breaking them down, and then on top of that, doing some advanced paint finishes. Now, I have already made a video on doing pre-shading and candy effects. It is linked below. If you haven't seen it already, I highly suggest you do check it out. That one I actually show you by hand how to do everything bit by bit. And then there's also the other video about the anodized paint finishes down below. And in that video, I also show a couple of little techniques to do a different type of paint finish that could be similar to the other one, but it just has a little bit extra steps to it. Another thing you might be wondering is, do you need to wear a mask when you're painting? Yes, you do definitely have to wear a mask when you are painting. You don't want to breathe any of the paints inside your lungs. Another thing is you want to do this in a well-ventilated area. If it has to be outside, paint outside, but at all means I suggest you don't paint outside because humidity and other factors can ruin the finish, as I mentioned in a previous video. Aside from that, there are spray booths that you can buy already built that have ventilation built in. What I have done, however, though, is build a custom one out of a corner cabinet. And I'm going to show you how to do that too in a future video, how to build your own spray booth. Thank you very much for watching. And if you like what you saw, please hit that like button, share, comment below, and let me know what you thought of this video, as well as any other points you want me to add into part 2 of this, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. And also to hit that subscribe button. Helps me out greatly in growing this channel and providing more content for you. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and